In today's video, I want to talk about the sun and the moon and the seasons. And before I get to my little infographic, I just want to ramble about, well, the relevance. And people today, they think that they're smarter than people in times past, but I think that's clearly not true. And it all works on this system of deception that the world runs under. And in order to be smart today, you got to learn more and more of the Masonic BS system, and the outer space stuff is one of those things. But it has nothing to do with reality. If you're supposed to be smart, then what? You got to know about quasars and what else? Any sort of science bullshit. People, they pick up their smartphone, which of course is kind of a joke because they make people dumber and dumber. That we just completely rely on technology for the simplest of things today. People practically can't do basic arithmetic anymore, and make fun of teachers. Oh, you said I wouldn't have a calculator in my pocket. Look, I do. Well, I mean, joke's on you because you can't do basic arithmetic. People can't. You're lucky if you get a reply back, a one-word reply from a text message today, and think of the type of deep emotional connections people used to have. Write each other long letters, write beautiful poetry, write in calligraphy. And yeah, to get back to the smartphone thing, pull out your dumb phone, pop open Reddit, and they're talking about diamonds falling on, or it like rains diamonds on the moons of Jupiter. And people open up their soy boy mouth and go, oh man, that's so cool. Man, we're so smart. We know everything. And yet, they know nothing about where they actually live. I didn't know anything about this because, yeah, my mind was full of the same sort of garbage. But what good does it do you? For all of the stuff I could learn about black holes and quasars and a white dwarf and a neutron star, first of all, I can't corroborate any of that. None of that follows the scientific method because nobody can corroborate any of those claims, of course. But how much does that do me good to learn about that? Could I walk outside and know exactly where the moon should be in the sky according to its phase? No, that didn't teach me anything about that. Does anybody do an orbital mechanics computation to figure out the phase of the moon or where it is in the sky? No. And it didn't teach me anything, learning any of that stuff, because it has nothing to do with reality. You're not learning truths. You're just being indoctrinated into a system and learning more and more trivia that has no foundation in reality. It's like being an expert on Klingon or Tolkien stuff. Same thing. Well, let's get into it. I'm going to show the truth that I came to when I stopped believing all of the bullshit that I was being taught in school, and I started to actually observe the reality around me, looking at the sun every day, looking at the moon every day and their positions. And this is the type of stuff that everybody, it's hilarious because, yeah, today you can talk about this kind of stuff. Oh man, the moon is really moving. It's on the move these days, moving like crazy. And the fluoride stare that you'll get from most people would have no, like, what? Or why would you care? What? They're so gone, so living outside of reality that you can talk about things like that and people are not even going to know how to respond. But isn't that crazy? You can talk about the moon and people don't want to talk about it or don't know how to respond to it. It should be one of the more fundamental parts of the human existence on Earth, is knowing what's going on with the sun and the moon and the stars. That all seems very very natural to me and like good things to know about. And yet people think that they have it more figured out today because they think all these weird thoughts about aliens. So they think that they're smarter than people in times past who knew what Pleiades was and what the implications, what that symbolized. And that's much more biblical, living in reality, God's reality that he made for us. Well, let's get to the meat of the video. So not all of these truths, that what I believe to the best of my knowledge to be truths, these were mostly just collections of observations that, yeah, I did hear about some of these through flat earth stuff, but mostly it's just from observing reality, going outside and just keeping track of the sun and the moon every day, going outside and trying to look at the sky. And notice that they have created a system where it's really hard to do that. It's really hard for most people. All right, most people after one day of going to their job, they're too exhausted even to think about, well, okay, now I'm going to go look at the moon, most people don't really have the energy for that, or just too apathetic, have zero interest. Why would I do that? And that, I just think, is disconnect from reality. And I think it's because people maybe subconsciously, I don't know how their magic works, but when they build that false reality about aliens and stuff, it's like people feel more satisfied to have a weird thought about aliens a couple times a day rather than go outside and actually look at the sky. And yeah, I mean, this video is not into getting into the whole psychological aspect, but when you start to learn about the firmament and the fact that outer space isn't what they say, that the sun and the moon are disks, you see reality different. You literally see it different. What you expect changes the way that you see things. And the night really is a starry dome, and you can see that it's a dome around us. And let's get into the video. The sun is hot. That one's obvious. That one NASA will talk about. The moon being cold, however, is not something that people often talk about. And so the moon, it's the more wacky one than the sun. It wildly will change its path out of nowhere. That's why I probably should have made this video like a week ago, because at the changing of the seasons, the moon is really on the move. It is changing its position wildly. It changes its position quickly and in weird ways. It's also the one, in my opinion, just through what I've observed, I live where there was the giant total solar eclipse. And I noticed in the days leading up to the eclipse, the moon seemed to be in the one, out of the two, the sun and the moon seemed to be the one that was in a weird position. Like, you're a little too close to the sun for what your phase looks like. That was my own interpretation of what I saw in the sky. So, but, so the moon's a little wacky, but the moon is also less powerful than the sun. And that's why I think they're able to get away with people not noticing that moon actually has a cooling effect in an opposite way to the sun having a heating effect. And I've observed this in a couple different ways. People, I mean, this was part of Flat Earth, I think, people talking about the moonlight being cold. But I also think it just, apart from the moon being cold, it's obvious, self-evident that it's a lie, that the moon is just reflecting the sun's light. And I've even heard Christian people talk about that, and they try to glorify God. To me, that's like the most cringe-tastic thing ever. When people take a lie about reality and try to spin it into being like a godly thing. And I've heard that before. Oh, the moon reflecting the sunlight is the way that Jesus's light shines through us. And people are like, oh, that's so cool. And I'm just cringing to death. The moon is a light. Read Genesis 1. It doesn't say that God made a giant mirror in the sky, and that's the moon. The moon is a light, and it's fundamentally different than the sun. And it has cool light. It's clearly not a spaceball rock far away. And if you can think for yourself and you actually go outside and look at the moon, you should come to that conclusion on your own, that it's transparent and it's a light. Okay, number 3 and number 4 are critical to understanding the way that the phases of the moon work. And this is the type of stuff that probably every ancient civilization probably had this thing figured out pretty quickly, but if you live in outer space reality, you could go your whole life without realizing these things. And no amount of learning orbital mechanics or learning about quasars ever gave me any intuition about understanding these things. That the moon completes its circuit more slowly than the sun, and the full moon rises opposite the setting sun. If you can understand those two things, that's all you really need to be able to figure out the moon phases. And this is where all of those cultures get their stories about oh, the sun eats away at the moon. It comes from this truth. And it's so much better than anything you learn in school. Anything you learn in school does not help you with reality. Seeing the pictures of the cartoons about the moon phases is just complete deception, and it doesn't help you at all. Nobody who learns those cartoons can tell you where in the sky should you see a waxing quarter moon. Okay, but if you understand reality and you understand these phases, and if you understand, oh, the moon eats away at something, it's like taking bites out of it, and then it's gone, and then it gets reborn. Like, that's literally a better way to understand reality than a cartoon image of the moon and things tilting and outer space. Outer space does not help you learn this stuff. It does not. Okay, so on the left, what's going on with these circles? On the left, I'm talking about number 4 here. A full moon rises opposite the setting sun. So imagine the far right position on that ring is the sun setting, and then the far left side of that ring is like, you look to one side and you see the sun setting, and you look totally to the opposite side and you see a full moon rising. Now, the next ring is like a couple days later. And so this all has to do with the number 3 thing. The moon completes its circuit more slowly. So if the moon and the sun traveled at the same exact speed through their circuit, then it would always be the same phase. It would always be the same thing. The moon would come up the instant that the sun went down. But think about it, the moon is a little bit more slow. So the day after a full moon, when the sun is setting, the moon's not quite there yet, because it's moving more slowly. The day after a full moon, the moon isn't quite there when the sun sets, so you have to wait a little bit past sunset. So that's the second picture right here. The sun is setting, but the moon's not quite there yet, and then you're missing some of the moon. And notice in these pictures, it's like the sun is catching up to the moon. And what happens as the sun is catching up to the moon, because it's moving more slowly? It's eating away at it. And that's where we get the tales from the ancients about whatever. Is it like a fox eating away something? I don't know what it is, but those people had it figured out better than outer space. So as the days progress, every day at sunset, the moon is getting caught up by the sun until it literally laps it. The sun will lap the moon eventually. And that's when you have a new moon, when you can't see the moon in the sky at all. That's a new moon. And it always follows the same pattern. So again, I told you before, no amount of learning orbital mechanics or cartoons can answer the question of, if I have a tiny sliver of a moon that is waning, getting smaller, its position in the sky has to be right in front of the moon or the sun. It has to be this scenario. This is the only scenario where you can have a waning sliver of a moon. And if you can understand this picture really well, then you can, well, where would one see a waning little sliver moon? It would most easily be seen right before sunrise. And you can get all that information from this, understanding this concept. And don't expect, if you're like, what in the world are you talking about? You don't have to feel bad. This took me a while of going outside and looking every day. So yes, the sun catches up. Hey, but the sun's not going to slow down all of a sudden. The sun is still going to keep going faster than the moon. So on the next day, when the sun sets, the moon passes through the other side. And how often have you seen this imagery in like Wiccan stuff or whatever, where you have a sliver of a moon and then it meets the sun, and then the sliver of the moon comes on the other side, and it's always facing it. I drew the slivers facing certain directions on purpose, which you'll learn eventually. So yes, the moon starts to grow because the sun is going to beat it. It keeps being faster. This really, it just comes from that. The sun is faster than the moon, or think of it as the moon moves more slowly. And as the moon gets farther away from the sun in the sky, it gets bigger and bigger until, again, you're at this scenario where the full moon is rising opposite the sunset. And yeah, to go back to the 501c3 type thing where they're lost. So we can pray for them that they are awakened to the truth in the Bible. I mean, this sounds crazy, but there needs to be a revival in your average Christian to understanding that the Bible is truth. In Genesis, that's true. When it says that the moon is a light, that's true. When it says that light existed before the sun, that's true. And it's in the Bible. And the earth being flat and unmoving is also in the Bible, and it's true. But I just want to tell a quick story about Enoch, because I recently had a 501c3 experience, and the person speaking, she was really into Enoch, but unfortunately she knew next to nothing about him. She appreciated the fact that it said that Enoch walked with God, and that Enoch was special, and that he was taken away from earth before dying. Enoch never died. And it was just sad to me that that was it. That's like all she knew about Enoch. And I wanted to be like, oh man, there's so much more. Enoch was the smartest guy. Enoch was the smartest guy on earth, and he knew so much. And there is some questionable writings attributed to Enoch. The book of Enoch, I just think, has been slightly corrupted by this point, but there's still so much truth in there. The talking of the fallen angels, which gets referenced in Jude. So it's not totally unfounded. It's biblical that Enoch talked about the fallen angels, because it's in Jude. And I think people used to understand Enoch's interpretation of the heavens. Circuits, they're on tracks up there. If you read the book of Enoch about what's going on in the heavens, it's so much better than anything out of NASA. And it's much more true as well. The sun and the moon, they follow tracks. The sun is much more consistent in the tracks it takes, but I think that the moon is the loony one, and it can go wacky sometimes, and it surprises you. I'm going to finish up this video talking about the seasons because it's not too complicated, and it comes from these two first things: sun hot, moon cold. Let me finish up. In the summer, the sun dominates the sky. In the summer months, you'll notice that the sun is high in the sky. It's more prominent in the sky, and the moon, conversely, will be low in the sky. So you have a very prominent heating element, and your cooling element is far away from you. I mean, this is the grain of truth. Of course, in their deceptions, they have to give you a grain of truth. They say it's about like the tilt of Earth. No, the Earth is not tilting and wobbling and all that. No, but it does have to do with the angle. It's about the prominence in the sky. The angle of the sun in the summer is that it spends a lot of time prominent, high in the sky. And in the summer, the opposite is true for the moon. The cooling element is very low in the sky. Where I live, I have a decent amount of trees in the south. And during the summer, I don't even get to see the moon because it's just blocked. Basically all summer. And then I start seeing the moon. All of a sudden, it's shooting up high in the sky. And this is where I said, man, I should have made this video a week ago. Because a week ago, the moon was doing its crazy thing where it just starts changing its tracks all of a sudden. And I think that the sun is much more gradual in its change. But the moon, it'll be like one day to the next, the moon will be coming up in a wildly different location. And that does not match NASA reality. That's why they don't have you do this in school. When you learn about the sun, when you learn about the moon, no, they tell you never ever look at the sun. And then they don't tell you to go look at the moon and observe it and watch where it comes up, watch where it goes down. No, they stick your nose inside of a book with cartoons, and that's it. They want you in that cartoon reality. A lot of these people are duped, and they don't know any better. They just think that that's the way that the world is. You teach kids out of a book with cartoons, but you got some sinister ones out there that they know, and they gatekeep this stuff. And a lot of people learn that reality is much closer to what the ancients talk about than what they learn in school. Anyways, yep, there's summer. When we go into fall, so we're right here. We're in fall. The sun is not as fast as the moon at changing its position, in my opinion, in what I have observed. I live in the north, up in Oregon at this point in my life. That's when I finally started paying attention to this stuff. It's gonna be more extreme the more extreme your latitude is. So in the fall, the sun is still pretty high in the sky, but the moon has shot up. And so now think of that, why that's going to change the seasons a little bit, but why it's not full winter. Because you still have a decent amount of sun in the sky, that's why you can still have pretty hot days in the fall, but now the influence of the cold moon is there. The moon is actually able to have a little bit of influence at this point because it's shot up to being high in the sky. It's more prominent. And I felt that probably, I don't know, 5 days ago or so. I went outside in the morning and I felt it. I was like, oh, it feels like fall. I can feel that cool, crisp fall air. And I don't think it's from the sun disappearing. I think it's because that moon. I also at the time was noticing the moon was doing its thing, getting all loony and changing its path very quickly. So what do you know? When the moon is now prominent in the sky, the morning has that cool chill to it that I'm used to in the fall. And then finishing up in the winter, the sun is now dipping really low, and it's the moon that is the prominent feature in the sky coming up real high. It's like, I mean, did I even ever notice that? Well, I grew up in California, which was much more equatorial, so it's going to be different. If I grew up in Oregon, I would have noticed that, hey, in the moon, hey, in the winter, the moon is really high in the sky. Yeah, I mean, I guess this is one of those scenarios. This may be different depending on where you live. It's not going to be as extreme the closer you are to the equator. And so yeah, in the winter, the moon's high, the moon dominates, the sun is lower, and then come spring, again, I mean, the one subtle thing here is that I believe that the moon does its thing more quickly and more extreme, and the sun is more gradual. And that's why you have a difference. That's why spring is different than fall, because in fall, the sun is still kind of in the high zone, and the moon is increasing its influence. But in the winter, the sun it's only just starting to come up, and the moon is decreased a lot. So you have a lot less chill in the spring, but the sun, it's not like the sun is full blasting. You're just getting a little bit more sun than you were previously getting. So anyways, maybe that's why the fall and the spring, yeah, more transitional, because it's the moon that's mostly changing its course. And the summer and the winter, it's more about the sun's dominance, or the sun is no longer there as much. Well, what do you think of this? I've done a few videos like this in the past. It never hurts to repeat yourself on important matters like this. And have any of you done kind of the same thing where you're like, hey, school is a bunch of BS. I'm going to try to figure out how this stuff works on my own. And you started observing the sun and the moon. And tell me if you came to the same conclusions as me. Or maybe if you live somewhere different, you came to some different conclusions. I'd be interested in what you learned. God bless everyone.